Support for this News from Lake Wobegon podcast comes from the Sleep Number bed by Select Comfort, the bed that lets you adjust the mattress firmness to your preference, your sleep number. And by Honey Nut Cheerios cereal. Made with whole grain oats, Honey Nut Cheerios cereal can help lower your cholesterol. Honey Nut Cheerios. Be happy, be healthy.
Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, my hometown. Up on the edge of the prairie, place I left to come to the University of Minnesota, these many years ago. And now I come back to the university and I feel under an unusual obligation to tell the truth, which has never hindered me much in the past. Especially when I travel around and do the show from other parts of the country, I've been able to halfway get people to believe other stories about where I came from and what I did. For a while, I grew up the son of a Swedish sharecropper in North Dakota, and I got on a toboggan in January, and there was a prevailing wind out of the northwest, and it just blew me down to Minneapolis, and it just seemed like too much effort to go back, and they didn't seem as if they would miss me anyway, so I stayed here. I've also said at various times that I was the child of Broadway actors who were on a tour of Minnesota and were doing a matinee performance in Anoka. And I was walking around the town and a tornado came up, which can happen very suddenly out of a sunny sky. This big black cloud comes up and it picked me up off the streets of Anoka and it carried me away, and suddenly I was in this cyclone, turning with appliances and animals and cars and branches of trees and so forth. And tornadoes do these amazing things. They exert tremendous force, and they can drive a blade of grass into a mirror, and they can smash barns and silos. But they've also been known to pick up a tray of teacups and carry it for a half mile and set it down unscratched, uncracked in an oat field. And that's what happened to me. I was set down in the front yard of fundamentalists who accepted me as a gift from God. And this was back before there were milk cartons, and so missing children had to just stay wherever you were and just make your own life. They didn't put the pictures of children onto milk bottles back then, so I grew up among them, although I did not belong whatsoever. And people have believed this story from time to time, including members of my own family. But the truth is that I grew up in a little town in Minnesota, and I came down to the university without any prospect that I would succeed. I grew up among dark people who always expected the worst. My scoutmaster, Einar, was a man with a very dark imagination, like most of them back there. Be prepared was the motto of the Boy Scouts. But Einar believed, be prepared, disaster will come. He was always worrying about escaped convicts from the state hospital in St. Peter, and he was always on the lookout for carnivores. He was always worried about bad water. And so we were always emptying our canteens and getting fresh water, which was not easy because we always camped on the top of hills. He was afraid of rock slides, and so we're always up on the top of a hill where there is no readily available water. And then in the winter we camped, and we'd be up on the top of a hill because he was worried about snow slides. And he was also worried about kids falling asleep, in winter. So he'd wake us up during the night to make sure that we were all right. He was always expecting the worst. But I didn't grow up like that. I didn't believe him because he had ropey spit. When he talked, you could see these big stalactites of saliva forming in his mouth. And this destroyed his credibility. And so I grew up an optimist and came to the University of Minnesota. There were few choices open to people then. Either you came to the University of Minnesota, or you enlisted in the Navy, or one of your uncles offered you a job. But my uncles knew me too well to offer me a job. And I was afraid of water, so that eliminated the Navy. So I came to the university. He came down here in the fall, and I took 3 courses. I took American Government from Asher Christensen in Nicholson Hall, and I had 2 classes in Falwell Hall. On the 3rd floor, I had a Latin reading class from Margaret Forbes, and I had a composition course from Richard Cody, without any expectation that I would even stay longer than a quarter or a semester, just long enough for them to find out what a fraud I was. I had no money. My parents had liberated me from the expectation of their support. They believed that work was a privilege and their children should be privileged children. So I got a job in the parking lot, including a big parking lot that was approximately just about where this building is right now, back before the university had a campus here on the west side, the west bank of the river. It's a great time to go to school. There was ferment in the air, and this suited us, who were 17 and 18 years old back in 1960, to have change in the air and to hear bullhorns from the lawn in front of Kaufman Union and people railing against the government and rallies and choirs singing. And we all sang these beautiful hymns of the civil rights movement back then. We all knew this song, and we'd stand. I must have sung it 10, 12 times, standing up in the main ballroom of Kaufman Union. Pete Seeger was giving a concert or something, and we all sang from the bottoms of our hearts, even though we didn't really believe it applied to us necessarily. We sang, "We shall overcome." We sang, "We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday." Oh, we didn't believe it though. I mean, for ourselves, we believed somebody would overcome somewhere. But when you worked in a parking lot, you worked on the early morning shift, and it got to be January. You were there at 5 o'clock in the morning with 8 other parking lot attendants in your white smocks, all crowded into a shack around an electric heater. It was cold out there. And it was an enormous parking lot, gravel, no lines painted on it at all. And there were 4 ticket sellers. Tickets were 15 cents. You paid 15 cents to come in. And they sold the tickets, and then there were 2 parkers. There was one at the top of the lot. This is a 8, 10, did I say 10 acre? Let's make it a 50 acre parking lot. One directed the cars down my way, and I was the guy down at the bottom of the hill. That would have been just like right over there. We're just on the edge of the bluff here on the river, and this big gravel parking lot was back over there. It was pitch black. You wore white gloves, but you had to make eye contact with each incoming car, and you had to direct it to its correct space. So you had parallel double rows of cars with an aisle going down the middle, and everybody should have enough room so that they could get out during the day. You stood there and you exercised all of the power that you could possibly have to make that car come right down here and park right there. It was an amazing thing for an 18-year-old person. You come to the university to read novels and to study metaphor and symbolism, but here's what you really learned was to use force to serve the common good and not to allow any individualism whatsoever. Any comedians who were wanting to strike out on their own and park ironically and park a little bit short or a little bit far. No, you have to park right there. You have to bring the nose of your car exactly there to learn how to make people do that and to exercise absolute authority. I never thought I would ever learn that, but you learned it parking cars at the university. The ticket sellers didn't learn anything. 15 cents. Nobody had the correct change. Everybody was in a big hurry. They just learned to deal with human aggravation. People would stick a dollar bill out the window and they'd have to count out those 3 quarters and the dime, and running out of change, the crew chief sat in the shack where it was warm. He counted the money. He wrapped up the dimes. The rest of us worked to create this system that would work for everybody. Double rows, parallel, no innovative parking. Everybody right here. And if anybody got out of line, you stopped everything and you went over and you spoke to them. It was quite amazing. I realized after I'd been at the university for just a few months that my natural talent for taking multiple choice tests that I'd picked up in high school, where you could hear by the tone of the answers which one was the right one. And back in the 1950s, the correct one almost always was C. So that if you always answered C, you'd probably get a C in the course. That talent didn't work for much here at the university. So I knew that brilliance would not get me very far whatsoever. I knew that I was going to have to find something else to do. And that's how I got into radio. I got a job at the university radio station, WMMR, up in Kaufman Union on the 3rd floor. It was a little closed-circuit station. It transmitted using the electrical systems of the dormitories as an antenna, so that if you plugged in your radio anywhere in a dormitory, you could pick up WMMR at 570. I had high hopes for myself in radio, not that I would overcome, but I had the face for radio, and I was able to affect a kind of friendliness and authority that I didn't possess, except in a parking lot with white gloves at 6 o'clock in the morning in the winter. But you tuned in to 570, and in the evening, we always had rock and roll shows.
Well, that was Johnny Mathis and I Want to Love You. And now, moving to number 4 on the WMMR hit parade, it's Elvis.
Slay me like a fool, treat me mean and cruel.
That was rock and roll every evening on WMMR, and all these guys who hoped to get jobs at top 40 radio stations. And late at night, there was cool jazz.
Working our way through the late night hours, making connections and intersections with east and west, north and south. It's Barry's Place, with yours truly, Barry Halper. Tonight, the sounds of Charles Mingus, with poetic interludes by Karen Halverson.
Line with silver the cloud, oh, the cloud, singly in the blue sky. And yet there, and there, and there, and there, and there shines the sun. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. It shines on me, baby.
Our broadcast day started about 12 noon. We didn't do early morning radio for some reason. We just didn't care to go out of our way. We started at 10:30 in the morning with Public Affairs Forum, where they discussed important issues.
Today, we're discussing foreign policy in a world of change, and my guest is Assistant Professor of Political Science, Professor Larry Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As you pointed out, Sharon, we do live in a changing world when the old certainties are changing, and we see the emergence of new forces, new influences, and we enter into a time of tremendous uncertainty, but also of great opportunity.
Okay.
This is not to say that we should give in to fear and retreat from the world. It means that we need to seek greater understanding of the factors that complicate change and the underlying forces that may cause crises, and to redefine the objectives of foreign policy. We face broad challenges that transcend political borders and affect whole regions or even the entire globe. And so, international cooperation is paramount as we deal with change and the impact of change. Our policy needs to be flexible but principled, more focused and yet innovative as we pursue our own goals, but with consideration for the greater good. Choices will need to be made, many of them difficult and even painful, but to choose is itself a choice.
Okay.
Above all, we need to have clear objectives if we're to play an effective role. The situation is evolving and relationships are changing, but good relations remain paramount as we pursue long-term goals. New approaches are needed if we're to continue to occupy a position of leadership.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today on Public Affairs Forum. Thank you, Professor Johnson.
It's my pleasure.
The high point of the schedule for me every day was right around 12 noon. At 5 minutes before noon, there was Audrey June Booth with the community calendar.
Okay, everybody. Now the Student Senate meets at 4:15 in the main ballroom of Kaufman. Okay? And Delta Phi Lambda is holding a mixer and snowball dance tonight at 8 in the Armory. Admission is 25 cents.
And then at 12 noon, I came on. I was the guy who did the noontime news.
Today's top story, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, in a speech at West Point, said America must stay the course against Red China, and he accused Democrats of planning to turn over the offshore islands of Quemoy and Matsu to Matsutung, which he called the sort of weakness that could bring on nuclear holocaust.
Right after my newscast, 12:15 was a program from New Delhi, Indian radio.
Yes, and good day to you. Thank you from the bottom of our heart that you join us now for the news from New Delhi in India. We report on a new hydroelectric project in the Ganges.
A lot of little international shows through the afternoon until it was time for rock and roll. I loved being a newscaster. The teletype sat there in the closet, and there were these little bells that rang when there were bulletins. I sat in the WMMR newsroom. There was a big window there, and sometimes students would pass by, and when they looked in, I always made sure to pick up a telephone and pretend to be talking to a reporter at the other end.
I got it. We'll get it on the air right away.
You just felt so important being a newscaster, having the news right there at your fingertips and being the one to tell it to people in the dormitories. And then that May of my freshman year, the manager of WMMR held a staff meeting on the third floor of Kaufman Union.
All right, people, I have bad news. Our engineer tells me that he went out to do maintenance on the transmitters last night, and he found that all of them had been switched off.
What?
They were all off. And
Our
as near as we
transmitters?
can figure out, they have been off since last summer.
Wow. Hey, so you mean we haven't been on the air?
We have not been on the air.
What? Oh, nothing?
Nothing. The VU meters were dark. The needles had cobwebs on them.
All that work.
All right, don't think about it.
For 7 months, we'd been sitting in a little room talking to ourselves. It was sort of a blow, and yet, when you're 18, you're really resilient. You're not discouraged easily. And 7 months of non-broadcasting teaches you a lesson about the transitory nature of life and of radio, for sure. No matter what people have told you in commencement speeches over the years, maybe we're not building anything. Maybe we're just living, just watching and learning. When I thought back over that 7 months, what I remembered was not the public affairs shows that we
need
did.
to seek a greater understanding of the factors that complicate
The
change.
news about Quemoy and Matsu. What I remembered about my freshman year were all those people who stood up and sang songs, all those songs that we used to sing back then. Here's one. Join us, if you like, here, the Hopeful Gospel Quartet.
Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Now if I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Now one of these mornings, and it won't be long, gonna call my name, but I'll be gone. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Now one of these days in the middle of the night, the people gonna rise and set things right. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep.
The News from Lake Wobegon podcast is brought to you by Honey Nut Cheerios Cereal. Made with whole grain oats, Honey Nut Cheerios Cereal can help lower your cholesterol. Honey Nut Cheerios. Be happy, be healthy. Hello, it's Garrison Keeler from A Prairie Home Companion, hoping you're having a good summer. We're going to have a wonderful summer at A Prairie Home with our big rhubarb tour, visiting state fairs and traveling all over the country with Susie Bogus, Fred Newman, the Guys All-Star Shoe Band, Guy Noir, Private Eye, the News from Lake Wobegon, and so forth. For ticket information, you can visit us at prairiehome.org. The show we've always wanted to do, so we hope we'll see you this summer.